In this section, we're going to look at how changes in supply and demand can be drawn down into changes in prices and quantities in the markets. In doing so, we're going to go through a 6-step process. In the first step, we just draw a starting graph. Put down a starting supply curve, a starting demand curve, your price and quantity axes, get everything labeled. Secondly, you want to read the scenario and really think about it. What's happening in the scenario? Third, you need to decide about what's happening in this scenario. Is it going to affect supply? Is it going to affect demand? Or might it affect both? We know sometimes if there's more than one thing happening, one thing might affect supply, another might affect demand, or it might be that whatever's happening will affect both supply and demand. Fourth, we need to decide the direction of any shifts that occur. That is it a decrease or is it an increase? If it's a decrease, remember whatever it is that's decreasing is going to shift to the left. Whatever's increasing is going to shift to the right. We need to make that decision for anything that we believe is going to change. Fifth, we need to draw whatever the new curve looks like. If there's a new demand curve, we need to draw the new demand curve in there, either to the right or to the left of the old one. The same thing with supply if there's a new one. And sixth, we need to check any changes in prices and quantities by comparing the old equilibrium with the new equilibrium. So let's consider a few scenarios. In this first scenario, suppose the price of plastic increases for some reason. Then the question is what happens in the market for mechanical pencils? So now we need to think about mechanical pencils, plastic, how do they relate to each other? Well, after some thought, we recognize that mechanical pencils are largely made of plastic. So that being the case, plastic would be considered an input for mechanical pencils. So we draw our price quantity axes, draw our supply and demand curve. We've thought through some of the scenario. Plastic is an input for mechanical pencils. That being the case, we have the price of an input increasing. Which side of the market does that affect? That's right, it affects the supply side. So the supply side will be affected by this increase in the price of plastic. Then we need to decide, if the price of an input increases, does that make me more or less willing to supply the good? And how is supply going to shift as a result? Yes, supply will actually shift to the left. That is, I'm less willing to provide mechanical pencils than before as the cost of producing them is increased. So there's a decrease in supply or a shift left. Now let's draw the new curve. And there we go. You can see the new supply curve lies to the left of the original one. Now comparing the old equilibrium, that is where S1 and D1 intersect, with the new equilibrium, that is where S2 and D1 intersect, we see the price has increased and the quantity has decreased. Now one way that we can kind of build the argument for why that would happen, imagine that supply shifted from S1 to S2 but the price did not decrease. In that case, we would still have the same quantity demanded as before, but a much smaller quantity supplied. In that case, we have excess demand, and we know excess demand tends to push prices up. But at the same time, as prices rise, we know the quantity demanded will tend to fall until we establish this new equilibrium. So in the new equilibrium, prices will rise and quantity will fall compared to the original equilibrium, as shown here. Let's consider another scenario. In this case, the price of peanut butter decreases. The question then is what happens in the market for jelly. So first, let's draw that starting graph. We have supply, we have demand, make the X. Remember, demand is downward sloping, supply is upward sloping. Right? Price on our vertical, quantity on our horizontal. So, peanut butter and jelly, how do they relate? Well, on the production side, it doesn't feel like these two would be related to each other at all. It's not like producing more peanut butter means that I have to produce less jelly, nor does it make producing jelly easier. But we do know that peanut butter and jelly are a very classic sandwich where the two would tend to be consumed together. Right? That means that they're complements in consumption. So, since it's on the consumption side, it's really the buyers that are going to be affected. In particular, demand is going to be where we see effects. So how will demand be affected? Well, let's think through that. If the price of peanut butter decreases, it means it's now gotten cheaper for me to make my peanut butter and jelly sandwich than it was before. That being the case, I'm going to tend to make more such sandwiches, which means I need more jelly to do that. So we would expect to see then an increase in the demand for jelly, or a shift to the right. Graphing this, we draw a new demand curve to the right of the original demand curve. And we can observe what happens. As the demand increases, we can see that there is an increase in the quantity of jelly that gets purchased, and there's also an increase in the price of jelly. It's shown by the arrows here. Now, the way we can reason through that again is if the price didn't change, the increase in demand would create an excess demand for the good. But as we know, with an excess demand, we have frustrated buyers. The presence of frustrated buyers tends to drive prices up. At the same time, as prices rise, we will see, even with exactly the same supply curve as before, a greater quantity will be made available. That is, quantity supplied will increase. Thus, we end up with higher prices and also larger quantities. Now, with these two scenarios, I actually lay out a general rule. Anytime that supply changes, we tend to see price and quantity move in opposite directions. So if supply decreases, we end up with higher prices but lower quantities. If supply increases, we end up with lower prices and greater quantities. With demand, price and quantity tend to move in the same direction. That is, an increased demand for the good, as in this scenario, will tend to increase prices but also increase the quantity purchased, whereas a decrease in demand will tend to decrease prices and also decrease the quantity purchased. Let's consider another harder case, scenario 3, where the expected price of gasoline decreases. The question is then, what happens in the market for gasoline today? Well, let's start with our starting graph. We'll always start at the same place, draw a demand curve, draw a supply curve, price, quantity axes. Now we need to think through the scenario. The expected price of a product, what does that change? Well, expected future prices, it ends up, affect both sides. Right, both demand and supply are affected by the expectations regarding future prices. Now, if I expect gas to be cheaper in the future, that makes me much more willing to supply it now before prices drop. I want to get rid of it before the price falls. And at the same time, on the demand side, I don't want to buy it right now. I want to wait until the price drops. So we'll see a decrease in demand. People are less willing to buy. That's a shift left in our demand curve. And an increase in supply. That's a shift right in the supply curve. Drawing all those in, get something like this. Now at this point it can be a little bit confusing because there are so many intersections, trying to sort out where our equilibria are. Now our original equilibrium, remember, is where D1 and S1 intersect. Our new equilibrium will be where D2 and S2 intersect. D1 and S1 are really just historical relics by the time this change has happened. Right, so we'd have our movement from the original equilibrium to the new equilibrium as connected here. And then the question is, what happens to prices and what happens to quantities? Here, it is relatively clear prices are going to fall. This we can be very sure of because the decrease in demand would tend to decrease prices, the increase in supply would tend to decrease prices. So the two are reinforcing each other and leading to a very significant drop in prices. At the same time, what happens with quantity is not entirely clear because here the decrease in demand would tend to draw quantity down. We would expect to sell less gas. At the same time, the increase in supply would draw quantity up, so we'd expect to sell more gas. Right? So quantity could move either direction. Now, the way that I've drawn it, it looks like things almost cancel out, but not quite. It ends up, if we don't have more information, if all we know is that demand's decreasing and supply is increasing, we can say, yes, price is certainly going to drop, but we don't know for sure what quantity is going to do. It could be we get a huge drop in demand that drags quantity down. It could be that we get a huge increase in supply that drags quantity up. It might be that the two balance out exactly, so there's no change in quantity whatsoever. This is a general rule. Anytime both supply and demand change, we'll be absolutely sure about the change in price or about the change in quantity. Only one of these will be certain. That is the one where the two reinforce each other. On the other hand, whatever the other thing is, we will be uncertain about. There will be some possibility of it increasing, decreasing, or staying the same. In this case, price, we're certain will drop. Both demand and supply push prices down. But we're uncertain about quantity. It could go either direction or it could not change at all.